we've been friends for a long time.
We have indeed,
We've
yeah.
talked photography
For years and years.
for too long, maybe.
Possibly. No, I don't know. You can't, can you?
No,
It's in you, isn't it?
it is, yeah.
It's certainly in me. I mean, it has been. I can't not photograph. That's one thing I know. That it's more than just, a sort of profession. It's innate, I think, within you.
Are there specific triggers that sort of get your photographic juices going?
I think for me, I'm always looking. It doesn't matter. I mean, I've actually just started a whole series just on images just around the house, which is quite interesting. So that if the light is just happening at that time, or there's something that occurs, or a shaft or something comes through a curtain or lands on a wall or something, then there's a whole series that I'm just working on. So it's that kind of awareness all the time, I think, and you can't get rid of that. You're forever looking, which I enjoy, because I think it just opens up, much more possibilities in the world. You just see much more, and I love that. So it's that kind of, as I said, it's a thing I can't not do. So I could be sitting down watching the telly, and then something happens, or there's a reflection on the telly, and suddenly I'm up and I'm having to work it. I can't not work those things. So the little things count. Those little things actually count. But then obviously then you go, I guess, searching for the bigger little things, if you like, which might be out in the landscape, or with me, with natural history and things that are happening there. But you're still applying those same principles. So you can be sitting down, watching the telly, and something happens, and there's a shaft of light, or there's a flicker of something, and you think, yeah, that's good. But you're still chasing those same things when you're outside. So it's that kind of applying that same process of looking, really.
You are looking at your website, and the documentary stuff you did as a student is really, really interesting. I mean, you spent a long time on the Rhiwlas estate.
It's it's and it's still with me. I mean, it's something I talk to students about as well, because we're teaching students who are in third year now, and it was in my third year in degree when I first went to Bala Rhiwlas and worked on that project. And that work is still with me, still used, still resonates. And in fact, one of the things I want to do in the next year or so is to take that work back and archive it properly. So I spent a year living with the rural community up in North Wales. That was my third year. Really lucky to have to be in an institution that allowed me to actually just go for periods of 6 weeks and then remotely have tutorials and things, and then come back with a body of work. Obviously working on film then, so I would develop everything up in Liverpool, where I was living at the time, and then take the work back into Rhiwlas, and then take it back down to to Farnham, where I was teaching. And as I say, that work is still with me now. And in fact, only last week, I was talking to students about it and showing them some of the work from there.
Did you keep diaries of that?
I did. I kept, they're here. Yeah, I've always kept diaries. I've always written. Wherever I go, if I'm going out, even now working natural history, keeping lists and things is important. Weather. And back then, every day I was out there, it's all there. And all the images on the film can be directly linked to a particular day that I was there, which is really nice.
Yes, I guess so. What period of time was this?
We're back, dare I say, back in the 80s, early 80s, in fact. So the work it's very strange to think that your work is kind of archival now, almost, historic. It shows you how old you're getting, I suppose, doesn't it? But, it's interesting. It's 30, what's 80 now? What are we, 80, 30, 35 years?
Yes.
Gosh, 35 years ago that work was done.
Flies.
A lot of people have died from there, but there is still a lot of people who are still, although maybe in their 80s and older, who are still there. And what I want to do is to get their stories about those images, so that they actually resonate much more with people. They'll live much more if I can do that.
It's very interesting, because we live in a time now where everything is instant, and you have to supply stuff instantly. So having that kind of luxury, I know you were a student, but do you think that we need to step back and do those sort of projects again?
I do, yeah. It is difficult now, and even with students, it's hard to project themselves into the future where they're going to be able to have that time. So I think that 3 years is really key to begin with, to be able to have that freedom. I mean, I've been lucky in some sense that I've managed to carry that on to some degree after that and still work on long-term projects. they might take a longer time because you're doing things in between. But I do think that long-term projects are really, really important. That's slowing down, getting to know people, getting involved in whatever community you're involved in, just gaining trust and letting it develop organically. I think too much, like you say, is the want of now, got to go now, get it now. And with regard to that, I think I've just started working back with 5/4 again, and film for a project we're doing in August. We've got a show up in the Atkinson Gallery in Southport. And I've enjoyed the discipline as well of slowing down that film allows you to do. It's too easy in one way, too quick, and with that comes a laziness of looking.
Yes, it's interesting. I read something the other day that in the digital age, people erase their mistakes from their cameras, and sometimes maybe that is not a good thing, that you erase.
I haven't erased anything. It's terrible. I mean, and with natural history stuff, you know, it's a percentage game, and there's a lot of rubbish, you know, that you do get because, you know, and it's all the same with any natural history photographer. Every time you shoot, it's not right by a long way. You know, things are out of focus, or you missed it, or there's a tail end of a bird in there or something. Every single one of those images you'll find here on this Trobo hard drive. It's sad, really, isn't it? But it's a legacy from film. I could never cut film up, could I? I could never dispose of film. You used to develop film 36 lengths, so they'd be in strips of 6. And then, you know, there might be the third one in there that was absolutely rubbish, but you never went with scissors and said, right, I'll cut that out and throw it in the bin. It was part of what you wear, part of your process. And I still, despite the fact that storage costs money and all the relevant, you know, all of that stuff, I can't chuck stuff. I can't go delete onto anything. I can look at something and it's actually, you can see it's patently rubbish. You will never use it for anything. I cannot press the delete button.
Interesting, though, isn't it? And I suppose you were talking about the doing stuff on 5/4. What is the project you're doing at the moment and involved in?
Well, the project is, I'm from Liverpool, and our kind of playground was the coast there. So it was the coast between North Liverpool and Southport.
When you're saying we?
Yeah, sorry, my brother, I got 2 brothers, and they're both kind of interested in natural history. One of my brothers is an artist, and the project that I'm currently working on is with Mike, and it's also with a poet and a sound artist. And all 4 of us are responding to a 20-mile part of the coast. And it's the part of the coast that, as I say, Mike and I, certainly used to play and walk, and I've got a lot of records there from the birds I saw back. Again, this is going back into the 70s, and I have diaries up there about, you know, what I saw then. And we're kind of producing a work that is our response to that now. So it's really interesting going back again to where your roots are. Yes, seeing changes that are happening in terms of the landscape usage, also the birds that are there. There's a big shift of birds. I've just been doing a whole set for the exhibition on the Avocet, and it's a block of 16 images of the Avocet that I'm working on with text and quotes. And the Avocet back in 1970s was not seen up there at all. You know, it's a very rare bird. It's the emblem of the RSPB, but very rare bird, passage occasionally up there. Now they're breeding, you know, and breeding in reasonably good numbers up there. And it's those kind of shifts that I'm really interested in as well. So we walked the coast for 2 weekends, 4 days last summer, and it was a patisserie project, so we invited people to come with us from the public, and it was a kind of response to what we saw. We also walked with a natural historian, very good natural historian on the coast, probably one of the best natural historians up there. So we were all getting much more information than we'd ever received before, which was interesting. And we had some work in the Atkinson last year relating to this, and fortunately enough, they've given us a big show this time. So we're kind of slowly compiling that work now.
Fantastic. But again, long-term project.
A long-term project. I'm going up regularly now to Liverpool, having to work, you know, under a certain amount of pressure, because I mean I'm living in South Wales, but I know the coast, so I know where I want to go when I want to go. But it's not ideal. But
where does the discipline come? Because there's a discipline to what you talked about already. I mean, keeping diaries, and I know you're very meticulous with your work. I would say you're a clean photographer.
Yeah,
in many
yes,
ways.
I think so. Yeah,
But where does that discipline come from, Tim?
I think it's about kind of making sense. I've always thought photography is about making sense of who you are and making sense of what your life is. And I think it's a kind of, I've always seen it as creating order out of chaos. I mean, it's something I would think photography is. It's a kind of, we as photographers, when we frame, when we're out in the field, we're creating order out of chaos. And it's that order, in a sense, that then I kind of bring back into my own work itself. That discipline of not only looking, but then of realising the importance of that work in relation to the wider context of your own work. And if you lose that and that discipline, then that kind of trail of who you are, it's like the importance of what history is, it's like where we've come from. So you look back and you can trace that. And unless there's an order and a discipline in that, I don't think you know who you are at the point that you're at now.
Interesting concept. Do you regard yourself as a psychogeographer then?
Partly, yeah, I would. Partly, I would. I mean, I think place is key to begin with. Yeah. All right, it's absolutely key. And within place, it's about more than a sense of place and more than an essence of place. It's about a historical interpretation of that place, or a historical understanding of that place. And without that kind of context, I think your work lacks something as well. So yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, you photographed. I know for a fact that you have an immense collection of photographs that are to do with Wales. Why did Wales? I know you're from Liverpool, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you like the urban at all, really, even though you're from Liverpool.
No, I mean I don't. I would always kind of recoil from that. Really, I guess the urban. It's like, I did work in London for a while. Hated every minute of it.
What did you do in London?
I was just a gallery photographer for the various galleries down there, and really didn't like it at all. Didn't like London. I mean, I kind of just recall from that busyness of everything, and I need quiet spaces. It's like coming back to, we were talking about the room. The room. I have to have a room. I have to have a space, and I can't find that in an urban environment. You feel very claustrophobic in it, uncomfortable with it.
Okay, interesting. But you'll put yourself in a hide to watch.
I'll put myself in a hide, absolutely, yeah. But that's not claustrophobic. That's actually living within, or not living, but it's getting as close as you can to communing, I think, with what's out there in a kind of surreptitious manner. I mean, that's what I kind of class as a hide. Some people would say, yeah, it's claustrophobic in there, spend 8 hours in a hide. It's kind of claustrophobic.
What was your first professional job as a photographer?
Ooh, gosh, first professional job. I probably made a right hash of it, actually, and it was for the gallery in London, the ICA galleries on the Mall in London. And I dread to tell you this story, but I will tell you this story. I was kind of a raw 20-year-old, I guess, at that time. Had a tripod, went in there, very, very nervous. Set up to photograph this Japanese exhibition of little miniatures. Set up in the main foyer. Set my tripod up, and this is honestly the absolute truth. A leg fell off the tripod. Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, how professional is that? Bang, a leg fell off the. I had to end up using Gwenda, who was with me. She's my wife at the moment, but I had to end up using her head. She sat really still, and it was like, and I was so embarrassed with it. It was an awful time. So I think, and I do kind of relate that one, to students as well. It doesn't go right all the time by a long way. Right.
But you've had some other interesting jobs as a photographer as well. I mean, you worked for the museum.
I did. I worked for the museum. I mean, you talked earlier about what brought me to Wales, or why I've got a large collection in Wales. Yes, from Liverpool, and Liverpool kind of capital of North Wales in many ways, so that's how it was seen. And I met a girl in school up there, and her family were Welsh and spoke Welsh, and so there was that connection to begin with. She, as I say, she's now my wife, and from college, my first job was the ICA galleries in London. From then I moved to medical photography.
Gosh.
And spent 4 years as a medical photographer, which was a great learning ground, really, really interesting learning ground. And we've students now who come through us and want to work in medical, and we've got good connections with the Heath Hospital in Cardiff, where our students will go and work experience. And in fact, we've got ex-students who are working in the Heath at the moment, and a really good learning ground, not only for the techniques that you'd learn, but for life, I think. I mean, I saw some things there that sometimes you wake up in the morning and think it's not a good day, and you can kind of relate back to working in a hospital environment, what we saw, and think maybe you shouldn't be complaining that much. But after that, from 4 years in Leicestershire Area Health Authority, I moved to Wales and worked for what was then the Welsh Folk Museum as their photographer, which was fantastic because that tied in the work I'd done in Bala, in Rhiwlas, as archival work, and I think that's what got me the job in the end. And had the chance then to work in archives, which was fantastic, and it was a privilege to be able to work there, handling early glass negs from early Welsh photographers, printing from them, printing for exhibitions, going out and augmenting and adding to the collection.
Did you find any gems while you were archiving?
Yeah, I can't remember necessarily the names, but yeah, I do. A lot of them were anonymous as well. Actually, they weren't always accredited to people, but yeah, absolutely, it's an astonishing archive. I don't think it's really opened up enough. I'm sure that if somebody's got the time sometime, they ought to be doing a kind of full, proper digital catalogue. I know they're onto it.
So does that mean then that we need some sort of institution in Wales that would look specifically at photography as a medium and be able to show and work and be a resource for?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a real need for it. I don't think the visual in Wales has always been given the attention it needs, and I think it's great what you guys are doing, because I think it will raise that profile, and I think it needs to be raised. But I do think there is a requirement. I mean, I was chair of Photo Gallery back, 15 years or so ago, I guess, and we were really looking then at trying to establish a Welsh Centre for Photography, and we were actually trying to do EMYR at the time. It all kind of fell through for various reasons, but it was quite an exciting thing to be involved in, just with the idea that we could do that. And I mean, EMYR has, a huge history anyway in regard to Welsh photography. Port Talbot, Fox Talbot, and the family and Fox Talbot coming and working down in EMYR at times as well. So there was a real reason why it might go there. It didn't work, which was a shame, but it doesn't mean that the premise of it isn't still important, and I think it should happen. We've got a big history here, and it's untapped, really. So I think we need to do that.
You are now, I would say, working exclusively, really, with nature and with birds specifically. Yeah. What's the attraction?
I've been an ornithologist, I guess, all my life. So initially, a lot of the diaries and things that are kept from the 70s are all about lists of birds I saw then. I had a love of ornithology from an early age, probably stemmed from my brothers, who were very keen on that, and I kind of followed them, I guess, into that. And it was almost a natural cycle, I guess. I think that it was going to come around to me photographing them at some juncture. I mean, I went to college and studied documentary photography. Still enjoy that, still work with that. Still like working with people in longer term situations. But I think slowly you kind of return to what your kind of true original roots are. I really do think that. And I think you kind of revert back to what kind of first of all inspired and kind of grabbed you. And that was, for me, natural history. So to be coming around and photographing that now, I think was always going to happen, and it has. And I've been doing it for the last 10 years, I guess, seriously.
Right. So, did you come from was your family photographic?
No, they weren't. Both teachers, dad a headmaster, mum worked in a special school for kids. So no, not at all. And I don't know where that kind of ultimately came from. No idea. But Mike's an artist, I'm a photographer. And my other brother's a good musician. So.
The art's obviously
somewhere. Yeah, it must have been somewhere down there. I don't know where.
But completing this circle that you're talking about, is kind of. I mean, I've looked at your pictures of birds and admired them because they are not conventional. Lots of them, and they tend to illuminate how amazing the creatures are.
Yeah.
And so what's your premise when you go out into the field? I mean, do you have, or do you look at something, a specific bird, or will you go, and how long does it take for you to acquire these images?
Well, that's interesting because, I mean, it's key. One of the things that's key for me is that it's not, the bird photography is not to go and find rare species or to chase anything in that way. That's certainly not what I'm interested in. And in fact, there is an element of me that kind of finds that a little bit strange as well, because, you know, there is this list and ticking and twitching, as it's called. And when they go and see birds like that, those birds are actually really struggling. You know, they may be vagrants that have blown off course, or they're absolutely knackered or tired and are likely to die or something, but people will flock to go and see them. There's something slightly macabre and strange in that for me to begin with. So no, I would much rather spend time with a house sparrow and actually begin to look at what that house sparrow is and to begin to understand it, watch it. Photographic, like you say, sometimes in its kind of habitat of the things it does that maybe we don't see often, you know? So kind of almost inquiring into that life a little more. And to do that does take time, you know? So it's not about collecting bird photographs. It's more about responding to what the bird is, whether that's a common species or not, and just enjoying watching what is going on with that. Placing them in the environment is key as well, and that's where the landscape, I think, comes in. So again, they don't tend to be tight portraits of birds. They tend to place the bird in their natural environment. So the environment is very important. And one thing I'll kind of think of is, first of all, does the picture work without a bird? And if it does, wait for the bird to come into it. So you're kind of constructing on two levels, really, when you're working. So it's not a case, oh, there's the bird and then shoot it, because that's not going to be right. It's like, first of all, set up, think about where your space is, construct your space if you're working in that way. If you're in an environment, think where everything is coalescing to work, and wait, and things will happen. I'm a firm believer in waiting for things to happen and not chasing, which is the kind of meditative way of photography as well.
Yes, I tend to agree with it, because I quite enjoy the thrill, the hunt really, of doing street photography. And I have a good friend, Dewi Glyn Jones, who's a wonderful storyteller with street photography, and he and we communicate a lot with each other, and we talk about the waiting. You actually sit or stand somewhere and just wait.
Yeah, let it come.
And it does come.
Yeah, it will come.
And it's an extraordinary feeling when it does happen and when things start to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I do spend time in hides, and my own hides that I've built on the farm. But at times I'm in hides where other people are coming in, and it does amuse me sometimes when they'll come in for 20 minutes or 10 minutes and go, and they'll come in and say, well, have you seen the kingfisher yet? No, oh, well, we'll go and have a look somewhere else. And it's like, well, if you wait, it'll come, it will come. But they're kind of moving around all the time, and there's something about, again, life that wants you to always think that something else is happening somewhere else, and where you are, it's better somewhere else. And it isn't. It'll happen if you wait,
Has this come with age?
Probably, yeah. Probably it has. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But you do meditation, you see.
Well,
I mean, it's something I've learnt about you today. I've known you for, 15 years?
Probably more, I think.
Probably more, yeah.
You taught my kids.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Well,
I do. It's, again, as I was telling you earlier, I went on a course and did meditation, transcendental meditation. Don't do it enough, but do it and enjoy doing it. And again, it's that kind of slowing down, I think, and responding to, dare I say, your inner self. And it sounds very pompous, but there is something in that. And I think I get that when I'm out in the landscape as well. I've also done a whole series of images over the years, which again I think you've seen or you know which are the kind of standing stones of Wales and burial chambers, cairns, and also in Scotland as well. I've done a lot of that. And I go to those places because there is definitely a spiritual within the landscape there. You can feel it. It is tangible. And I can really, really feel that there. Now, is that psychosomatic? I don't know. Or is that real? I tend to think it's real.
I think I'm probably with you there, actually. You can stand on a mountain or stand in a valley and feel something special.
Yeah, you can. You can. You do feel it. It is like, you go into those places, and even talking about it now, there's kind of goose pimples coming on me, because it really is real, and I think you have to be able to feel that and respond to that. And it's coming back to the idea about history within landscape and place within landscape. It's accumulation of all those things. It is us knowing that there was that big, strong religious element, or what standing stones were for, and partly the not knowing of what's there as well, partly a historical thing, that just to stand in front of something that has been there for 5,000 years and kind of virtually the same, and touch that stone. It's an interesting thing to do.
It is an interesting thing to do. Actually, it starts in the room you're sitting in at the moment, and you can see on the wall here, there's shadows, there's light, it's kind of, and looking for those sort of elements. It is a question of looking, and I can go and revisit places that I've been to. I like going down to the Preseli. I like going to where I was brought up, which is Pencaer near Fishguard, and walking some of those paths and hearing the sounds and taking photographs of that area is something special.
I think it's coming back to the work I'm doing at the moment, and what you just said, Brian, as well. I think that trying to get a whole sense of a place, and through a combination of experiences, so sound, poetry, words, art, photography, and then understanding culture, history of that place. I think that's perhaps what is missing in younger photographers today. I think it is, and maybe again it is that kind of quick fix that is kind of wanted, that I can go and do something quickly and not invest that time. And I honestly think if you invest the time, that's when, and I don't want to sound again too pompous on it, but that's when a spiritual can come through. That's when you really can feel something. But unless you're prepared to invest, don't expect to have those kind of feelings. And that is, I think, when the immersion within a landscape and within place becomes key.
Well, I mean, you have lots of books on birds. I know you have a fantastic collection of books on birds. Early bird photographers, how did they go about their business?
Oh, it's great. And I've been collecting early bird photographers for quite a while. There's one I've just got, which was The Home Life of the Golden Eagle by, I think it's Macpherson, 1910. And I was looking, I think I was telling you, when we were in the pub the other day, there's a plate in there, I could find it right now, and it gives you the, equipment and the aperture that he's using. And bearing in mind this is a golden eagle, so a very difficult bird to photograph anyway. And there's one plate there that says F8, 10 seconds. And I just love it, F8, 10 seconds for a golden eagle. Now, yeah, they do stand kind of very rigid and still when they're kind of over their territory, looking out from over the nest. But come on, 10 seconds. So, I mean, I do like, it's partly why I'm back in 5.4, I guess, to some degree. It's kind of beginning to experience a little, only a little, of what these guys did, like the Keaton brothers, R.B. Lodge, Oliver Pike, people of this nature, some of the pioneers of early bird photography. And actually in a project that I'm working on at the moment, Birds Eloquent, I'm using some of the quotes from these photographers against some of my work, which I think in some sense underpins where my philosophy of bird photography is. There's some lovely quotes. I think they understood it in many ways a bit more than we do now. And I think partly, coming back to that, Brian, again, it's interesting, and partly that is because of the time they had to spend. You know, it's a little easy for us, if I'm honest now. You know, back in sort of, 1900, it was a harder game.
Well, it was the equipment and lugging it around.
And if you look at some of the hides and things that the Keaton brothers constructed, or how they constructed it, there's a lovely little kids book called "In the Belly of an Ox," which is just it's an artist who's done a story of the Keaton brothers through just like a kid's book. And you look at them and you think, oh, they've got to have made some of those up. They couldn't have done that. And at the back of the book, there's real photographs of the hides and how they constructed them. You think, actually, they did, And in the belly of an ox refers to the fact that they were one of the first photographers to use this concept of a hide, and they'd seen that actually birds were not afraid of cows. So, they thought, well, actually, we'll get a cow then. And we'll get the skin of a cow and we'll just hollow that out. We'll sit in it, put it in the field, and we'll sit there, and the birds will come to them. Fantastic.
Who do you admire as a photographer?
Well, I can tell you why photography really became important for me, and that was a very salient moment when I was an 18-year-old, and I went to a talk by an American photographer called Ralph Gibson. And there are moments in your life when you just know that's what you want to do. And again, I'm kind of getting this slightly goose-pimply feel when I talk about this, because it's so important with me. And I sat there. I had an exhibition in Walker Art Gallery, I think it was at the time, and then he was doing a series of talks, and I went to them. And he showed work that probably you wouldn't associate me with necessarily now, but it was really beautiful. It was eloquent. It was off the wall slightly, beautifully seen stuff. And I walked out of that place thinking, that's for me. That's what I want to do. And it was from then on that I didn't kind of look back on it, and photography's just been my life since then. So Ralph Gibson is the first photographer that is kind of key, I guess, with me. Then coming up through education, photograph education, 3 years in degree, it was probably more of the documentary photographers then. And I actually spent 3 weeks work experience with a guy called Chris Chapman, who's a very, very fine photographer down in Dartmoor, and he's got a wonderful collection which kind of inspired me to begin the Welsh collection, I think, that I've worked on. People like James Revilius, again, great photographer. Chick Chalmers, Scottish photographer, and obviously some of the kind of big pioneers from earlier on. So a big hero would be Eugene Smith. Yes. And as much as Eugene Smith for his philosophy and his attitude and his incredible determination that his images were going to be used how he wanted them to be used.
Actually, that's part of your raison d'être as well, is that you your passion about it being right is I've always admired that in you. And
to a detriment sometimes, perhaps, because
you're overcritical, perhaps. Yes?
Yeah, I think so, and also there is that sense that it's never right. It's never ever right, and in a sense, it never ever being right means that you're always reluctant, perhaps, to show some of that work. And I have been criticised at times for, well, why don't I show much more work than I do? And yeah, I probably will at some juncture do that.
Perhaps you've reached the stage in your life where that it would be important.
I think perhaps I have. I think perhaps I have, actually. But the nice thing about that is that photography for me isn't about showing work or having it necessarily published, although I have had that, number of books and things done, but it's more about what it means to me. And this is coming back to that key thing that I can't not do photography. That's the interesting thing for me. So I can have a lot of images and people say, why haven't you had a show of this or a show of that? Because that kind of side of photography has never really interested me. You know, I mean, I have shown and done exhibitions earlier, but I've had a kind of quiet period when I haven't done that. But it's not kind of worried me. I've still photographed. It's still there. I still need to do it. And maybe one day somebody will look at them and say, oh, we'll do something with them now. I don't know. But maybe I'll do that, as I say, when I, you know, get a little older again. I don't know.
You were talking to me earlier about, I mean, there's a local farm here that that you go photographing, and you're going to spend maybe a year.
It is a thought. It's a discipline again that I'd have to do. It's a farm. It's only about 3 miles away from here, and the River Ely runs through it, and we've built 3 or 4 hides on the land. And I've got my old caravan on there, which is great. So it's a little bolt hole if ever I need a bolt hole. And coming back to that, it's rather nice sometimes to be able to get out of the kind of melee of everything, you know. And there is an idea. I've worked on it for, I guess, about 6 or 7 years now down there, but in spells, you know. And what I haven't done is actually gone right through a year. So there is an idea that I should be disciplined enough to only photograph down there. And actually it was Hugh, my lad, my son, who said, Dad, why don't you just do a year down there and photograph nowhere else? And I thought, could I do that? Could I not sit in my lounge and when that light flickers through and hits the wall, say, actually, I said every image is going to be taken just down in one location? And I've kind of argued with it and said, well, what's the validity of doing that? What's the, do you know? And I'm not sure. I can't kind of quite get my head around whether the discipline would be fantastic and say, no, every time I press that shutter, it has to be within a certain place.
Yeah, I remember you telling me once that a project you wanted to do is you wanted to sit on a beach in one place and just photograph the tide every 5 minutes.
Which I've done a few times.
You've done a few times?
Yeah.
You don't show me though.
Yeah, no, I've done this a few times. Yeah.
And what was the other thing you were going to do? And you had a rotational system where the degrees of the camera moving. Have you ever done that?
It's the construction is made. It's in the loft. It's kind of waiting to happen. Yeah, so it will. So there are projects that are kind of on the go. But no, I haven't done that. But it is again about the nuances, I think, of what's down within the landscape. And the idea is to take the camera down and be incredibly accurate in how you record certain things down there. And to actually be able to place the camera on a rotational motor and literally within degrees start looking at changes, and also within depth of field. So you change depth of field as a degree moves. But, I don't know, you know, it's
But that was inspired by your another artist friend of yours, Brendan Burke.
It was indeed, and Brendan, I've done some work with Brendan's paintings on that and rotated them. They're on the computer here. So, because Brendan's paintings are all on the coast, all inspired from Pembrokeshire and down by the coast, and we've walked many times together down on the coast. And we've talked about doing some work together over the years, and we're kind of tentatively touching on this one again. So what I've done as well is I've put Brendan's paintings on this circular platform and just moved it degree by degree, holding the camera steady and then photographing. So there's a change in the paintings because Brendan's paintings are very tactile. Yes. And you know, it uses oil and wax in a way that gives the paintings height. So when you look at them on a level, they become almost the landscape and the places that he's been working from. So yeah, so there's all sorts of interesting. It's time, isn't it?
It's time. I've got a whole bunch of photographs, loads. I went to a Cromlech in Newport.
I know the one.
Yeah, it's a beautiful one, and it's kind of in an estate.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it?
It's very strange. But I discovered, I photographed it, you know, and then I discovered that there were all these, because of the lichen on the rock, that you could actually hold your camera quite close to the rock, and you could photograph the lichen, and you would see landscapes within the lichen, which was fascinating.
Well, there's a wonderful book called 10 to the Power. and it's really what it does. It looks at, it takes a couple in a New York park, Central Park in New York, and it has a photograph of them from 10 yards above. So they're just lying, picnicking in the Central Park. One side of the book goes 10 to the plus, the other side goes 10 to the minus. So one goes into the people. So the next one is a meter, and the next one is a centimetre, the next one is a millimetre, and then they go into the hand, and they keep going 10 to the minus.
Right,
Okay, so they get into the atomical structure
Right.
of the hand. The other one, on the other side of the book, goes the other way, and it goes up. So 10 to the plus, 10 to the plus, 10 to the plus. And the interesting thing is, when you reach about 10 to the power 10 on each side, both are looking exactly the same. The structure is looking exactly the same. And the interesting thing about that is that, coming down to what you're saying, is that scale is just relative.
Mm.
It's completely relative, and it's relative to us. And we're the ones who decide on scale. Scale is really, it doesn't really occur, because as you go either way,
Yeah.
similar things are occurring.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting thing as well.
Yeah. Detail. Well, talking about detail. I mean, will you use that? I mean, I know you use that photographically, and you will look at the detail of in a place. So, would you just concentrate on that when you would go out and photograph? Let's say down on the farm.
Down
when
the
you're
farm
doing
for
your
that.
job?
I wouldn't just concentrate on that, but it would become quite a large element, and that in a way is where the sustainability of working in a year in just one environment would come from. It would come from really looking at things perhaps you hadn't looked at before, to spend time in a place that you hadn't spent time, to get a macro lens on, to get really close in on certain things, to look at how the landscape of the close reflects the landscape of the wide. So yeah, I think that the only way you could sustain a project in that way would be to look at it, and this is where the discipline will come in. This is where the excitement of doing something like that comes in, because you're forced to find things. So although I kind of do say that those things resonate with me all the time, and I'm looking all the time, you do still have to go and challenge yourself sometimes and say, right, I'm in this place now. Maybe it's a place I would never photograph. Maybe it's somewhere that intrinsically you just walk past. And what you say is, I'm not doing that this time. I'm staying here. I'm giving this space time, and I'm then going to see what happens. And I enjoy that discipline, you know, of giving a space time and staying with a space and looking. One of the things that I've done in the past with students is to, in fact, I remember doing a project with them down in Pembrokeshire, funnily enough, and we got a minibus.
Oh, you do.
And we went down. I probably told you the story.
Probably, is it?
It was around the Druidston area. We went down there. They were very excited to go to Pembrokeshire, and when we arrived there, got them out the bus and said, "You're each now going to have 10 square yards to work with on this day." So I'd taken them down to this place and then said, "You have 10 square yards," and we drew out 10 square yards and we sat them in there, and they had to work that for a day. Initially the response was, "What the hell have we come down here for? We've got all this wonderful landscape here. Why are we doing 10 square yards?" The images they got from that were quite extraordinary. They could photograph within that 10 square yards, out of that 10 square yards for sure, but you can only do that for a certain amount of time before you're having to look at what's under your feet, of how the 10 yards in front of you kind of responds to what's outside of that, of how you can change your viewpoint, change your lenses, but hold within an area. And I'm a firm believer that there's an image everywhere you look. It's like coming back to that home series that we're working on, or that I'm not working on it, it's just happening. And you've just said, you know, there are great things happening here with light that's dancing around this room right now as we speak. Yeah. And if we had a camera now, I know, because I've been out with you in the past, we'd be playing this, and we'd be working this, and we'd probably working it in very different ways.
Yes, that's interesting. I mean, we've both, and we haven't done it for a long time. So
I know,
we have to do it.
We need to get out.
We need to get out. But when we do go and photograph and compare images that we've taken of a place, the difference is extraordinary. And in a kind of way, they do sort of match up as well. But and style. I mean, the photographic style and what some people see and what other people see is extraordinary, and it never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah, it's great to have 10 people work the same thing and see 10 very different things come out is exciting. You know, I think that's what we should be doing as photographers, and I think it's what students should be doing. Set them a brief. The last thing you want is 10 or 20 similar things coming through, and thankfully you don't get that. And that's where the freedom of photography lies. You know, you can take a particular subject and it really can be played in all sorts of different ways.
We were talking about journals and keeping a diary of when you're out in the field and doing work. How important is that in the great scheme of things?
It's very important. I mean, words are important. The actual images will trigger certain things, which again, coming back to that idea of photography being almost a timeline of who you are and what you are. But the journal adds to that in terms of a diary. So I think it's really key to do that when you're out in the field. My blog is a little bit like that. It's been a bit quiet lately, but my blog is about that. So if I'm out in the field, I'll blog about, you know, what it is. And sometimes that blog will refer to historical information. It'll refer to maybe other artists that are working similarly or something of that nature, you know. It does remain key. Writing has always been important to me, still remains important to me. Doing a journal right now on the work I'm doing on the coast, the north west coast between Liverpool and Southport, so still working on a journal. It's a way I can't not do, because again, it's about reflection. So I need to have time and I need to write to see what I was doing at a certain time, how I felt at a certain time.
Does it mean then that your pictures in isolation wouldn't have the same meaning without that journal background?
For me, probably they wouldn't. No, I think that they, you know, there's always a recollection that an image will bring. Okay, it's almost an aide de memoire, the idea of an image. But I think if you can augment that, then that's absolutely really key to do that. So I think with students, coming back to students as well, we get them to try and work in this journalistic manner of producing journals, workbooks, research journals as we call them. And they struggle a little bit with it. We get some very good ones, but they do tend to struggle with it because it's kind of an alien thing for them to do. And what we try and do is kind of make it almost a cycle of research and then go out and reflect on what you do, link it back to research. So there's a kind of cycle that develops, and it's a cycle that in a sense you're always doing in your mind when you work, but to formalize it I think is a really useful thing. That way as well you can always go back and see where was I 3 months ago on this project, what was I thinking? And that might trigger something that you've worked on now that you suddenly think that needs to come back into the fore. Now if you've not made that kind of journalistic record of those things, that's not there. So your work again, it's coming back to that idea, your work has to have roots.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying, see, because kind of the work I have to do in order to earn a living, some of it is quite interesting. I mean, I photographed a writer the day before yesterday, and I had an hour, which is really great to have an hour to do somebody's
long time.
It's a long time. So we had an really interesting conversation. He's translated a play from Welsh into English. So there was all that sort of buzz going on, but I don't record that. I know that it happened. I know when I look at that picture of him, it's in my head. So the diary is kind of in my head.
But I would kind of ask you that, say in 5 years' time, when you look at that image again, and yes, that will be there, but that whole conversation won't. But if you'd perhaps spent, I mean, I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm speaking for you out of turn, but maybe, you know, if you'd have spent even a dictaphone on that night and just said, okay, interviewed so-and-so, photographed so-and-so today, you know, he was talking about.
Yes. See, this is.
But it's a commercial constraint as well. Yeah. So it's time, isn't it?
It's time, but it also highlights my laziness as a photographer, and to a certain extent my scattergun approach to photography. And you're quite right, because those pictures, if anybody looks at them in the future, will have no meaning whatsoever to anybody.
It's context. It's trying to gain, and coming back again to the Bala stuff 35 years ago. Yeah. Although I've got a diary of every day and every shot that was taken, what I don't have is the recollections of people who are in them, who can inform that much more.
I mean, you told me a wonderful story, and it would be really nice, about the guy who couldn't speak English.
Coy, Richard Thomas Jones.
Tell me his story.
Well, that was again when I was at Bala, and he was he used to be a postman, I believe. I hope I'm getting all of this right. And then kind of retired and had a little small holding, but he lived on the Rewlas estate in a house that didn't have electricity, water. I'm sure that's gone now. I've not been back to the actual place. I can't believe it's still there. And it became really, for me, people said, "Oh, you'll never be able to photograph Coy. You know, he won't photograph." Now, I've always been a kind of a Welsh learner. It's terrible. You know, I've been a Welsh learner for 40, 35 years. It's ridiculous. And maybe when I retire, I'll be a proper Welsh speaker. Who knows? But I was kind of learning Welsh then, and had a degree of smattering of Welsh. So I talked to him in a very broken, not very good Welsh. Kind of made a contact with him and arranged to spend a day with him. And it's all written down. The images, I really like those images. And the story goes, which was quite amazing. I had a show in Bala at the end of the year, and 2 weeks before the show he went missing, and nobody knew where he was. And I didn't know whether I should put the images of him up in the show. His family said yes, please do, you know. And I think about a week before, he was found in a ditch which was his route back home, and he died coming back from Bala to his home. And his family wanted those images up, and some of the comments I had in the comment book after about those images kind of still resonate with me. But I've got all of those, you see, you know, I've got all the comments from the comment book from the show. But in a way, that's why photography is so good as well. And there was another story relating to the Bala one. We went to a funeral of somebody who was involved within the in the images, and about 5-6 years ago. And there was somebody there who came up to me and said, "You photographed my grandfather years ago, and me on a farm." And I said, "Yeah, I think I remember." And he said, "Oh, my grandfather, he had no thumb, and it's the one with, I don't know if you know it, it's an axe, yeah, and with a small child." And he said, "I'm the child." And I said, "Oh, that's really interesting. Would you like a picture?" And he said, "No, it's all right. We've still got the one you gave us. It's on the mantelpiece." And I mean, I know it sounds quite sentimental in a way, but that's what photography can do and means, I think, if you treat it correctly somehow, you know. I've always thought with photography, and I try and get this over to students, that as photographers we shouldn't just take. Why should we do that? We should give as well. You know, as photographers we're nosy people to some degree.
Yes.
Particularly in the documentary side.
Absolutely.
You know, we're curious and we're nosy. And the camera's a tool for us to open doors with. You'll have found that. Yes. You know, go up to people, ask them, and amazingly they'll say yes, come into my front room and take pictures of me, you know. And if you just knocked on the door and said, "Can I come into your front room? I'm interested in your mantelpiece," they'd say no. But if you say, "I'm doing a project on this," and you know, then suddenly the camera's got you places and in. But because of that, it doesn't mean that we should take that as our God-given right. We should then give back. And I've always believed that. So throughout the Bala project, it would always be about giving images away as well as me taking. Yeah. And I've kind of held that principle as much as I can and try and get that over to students. And also a relationship builds up with people, which is much stronger then.
Actually, this conversation is making me think quite hard about what I do and the way I approach things. Which I've not given it much thought, I must admit, about this sort of thinking about writing things down. I have, I think, on my website a blog place, but I've never blogged. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm scared to do it. Maybe it's, because in effect, by writing it down or recording what you're doing, it is actually an important thought process in many respects.
I think it is, yeah. I think it is.
And kind of vital, because, you will find go around, it's not antique fairs, but you see boxes of photographs, boxes of people's
where's the
lives,
story?
and there's no story
Yeah,
there.
where's the story?
And that's kind of quite sad.
Yeah.
Because I was thumbing through some stuff on St. Mary Street, and they have a kind of fair there, and there's a guy, he had a box full of photographs, all nicely kept in envelopes and things. He was charging a fortune for them, but there was no context whatsoever. And there were some really lovely photographs. So you're right.
I think context is very, very important.
Did you discover, because I presume the stuff that you were looking through when you were working at the museum and the plates you were seeing, they didn't have any context either, or did they? Or some did.
Yeah, some they'd have a date, they'd have where they were got from, where they were collected from, and then there were some, historians and the archivists who would try and trace and find information about them. So they were filling. There was a card that they used to have. I presume that's all been digitised, where they would try and extract as much information as they possibly could.
So do you put that? In your workflow? Do you put that information on your metadata?
No, I don't. No, it's in the diary, but I don't put it on the metadata. And maybe it's something I should do. It's that extra discipline to do that, because then it's always there with the image as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Because the metadata stays with the image. So, maybe that's, in this conversation, thinking, yeah, actually, why aren't I doing that in the metadata and just typing out what it was and the day, instead of just putting it in a journal that perhaps sometime will get dislocated from the work itself. So, I might have all these journals. You can open that cupboard there, and there's journals galore in there, but maybe tying them up, and if somebody throws that box away one day and has the photographs, so we'll keep the photographs, but let's get rid of all of these. That goes. But I guess one thing with digital is you could be putting it directly with the image. So,
how do you cope with workflow in the modern sort of era? Because we're taking a lot of photographs. I mean, I take a lot of photographs, and I find that it's getting increasingly painful in some respects.
Well, I work on. My workflow is from camera, and then into it's a Drobo, so it's a sort of an arrayed backup system, and I'm fortunate, I have to say, that my lad again is very IT savvy, and so kind of helps me with this sort of thing. And there's a remote backup from this that every time I download images, downloads to another backup off-site. So that's always happening off-site. So there's always a backup off-site. But I work in Lightroom primarily. Photoshop I touch a bit, but not much. Most of the things I can do, I do in Lightroom, because I'm not a manipulator. I never have been. What I do in the digital platform is work in the same way as if I was in a darkroom, because I'm darkroom trained.
Yeah.
Did a lot of work in printing in darkrooms, and I tend to limit everything that I do in the digital platform back to, if I could do it in a darkroom, I'm allowed to do it there. If I couldn't, then I'm kind of a bit worried. And that kind of holding on to a sense of truthfulness within the image is key. I think today there tends to be too many saturated images as well. There's too many images that are kind of pushed with the saturation. I think, whoa, hang on, kind of like to try and keep it as much as what we saw. Very difficult to recall that, of course, but that's a kind of aim on that one.
Craft's important.
Craft is hugely important. When you used to work in a darkroom, then I used to have darkrooms off-site and at home sometimes, and I'd go up for a night. Used to love it, going up for a night, and you put the bit of music on in the darkroom, lights go off, smell of chemicals, a little glass of malt whiskey, and away you go for an evening. Love it. Yeah, really, really miss that. And then on a night, like that, if I came out of a session with, say, a 4-hour printing session with 2 images that were good, that was a good night, because they take time to work on. And you'd be looking at your prints, you'd be comparing them with something, there'd be ones in the bin, you'd not quite get it right, but you'd work again, you'd really work finely at it, you'd be heating up your developer, and you'd be with a little brush putting stuff in to work on. You'd have another little bit of stop with another brush that you could stop actual development coming through at times. You're working to fine degrees of working, and that craft element I love, and I've carried that craft element through on the digital platform. And I think if I have a kind of a bit of a gripe to students that I see, is that, and I'm not saying this to every student, that every student is like this, but I would say the majority don't have that element of craft within their work now. I think the digital platform has made them lazy, and they see that when they take the image, that's almost it, apart from perhaps a bit of levels. Doing the levels, if it looks a bit underexposed, they'll increase the levels on it, instead of saying, actually, can look at that as a digital negative. That's your digital negative, that is. The trouble is, it comes out as a positive.
Yes.
So they see it as a positive. I sometimes think if it came out of negative and they had to do something in between them, it might be better in some way, but it comes out as a positive. And when it comes out as a positive, there's an idea that that's it. Don't have to do much because I've got it. And it's like, no, that's your starting point. That's your raw point. And if you photographed it correctly, the amount of information that you have there can be brought out. And it can be brought out beautifully, but it takes time. And again, I guess I come back to this, it seems a kind of recurrent theme in our conversation today, is investment.
Yes.
An investment of time in the field, investment of time in understanding your subject, an investment in time in processing.
So therefore, photography is all-encompassing. It does rule your life.
It rules my life. Yeah, it rules my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't come home and not think photography, or not read photography, or do photography. I mean, sport's my other thing. I love Liverpool Football Club. There we are, because I'm from Liverpool and everything. But other than that, it's photography. I come back to what we said. I mean, it's with me, and this is a word that is used far too often, is passion. Yeah. And it kind of hurts me a little bit sometimes when I read students when they say, I have a passion for this, and I think, no, you don't. A passion is more than a passing interest, and I think that word is. Do you
think photography is a very selfish art form?
I think probably it is for me. In one way it is, because I've said that it charts my existence and I need to photograph, so in that way it is selfish. At times I think that selfishness disappears when, like some of the stories about Bala and what your images have meant to people, then I think that's when it can sort of transcend the selfishness
and the giving
of that. Then I don't think that's selfish. But I mean, as a broad process of what photography has meant to me, then probably it's actually meant quite a selfish journey.
Interesting. Yeah, you see, it's very strange. It sparked something off in my head about another photographer who I know, Matt Horwood, who is self-taught photographer. He works in, he does news. And it was very interesting. I had a long conversation with him over a cup of coffee. And Matt is a really intelligent guy. I think he's a good. Oh no, I think he's more than a good photographer.
Yeah, I've seen his work. I know his work.
But he, because of the nature of the work he has to do, he has to photograph dogs and people with dogs and people on a sled, and he has to do that mundane stuff that newspapers eat. And he was telling me, and he was flicking through his images, and I was asking him if he had any time to do any of his own work, and he said, no, I'm too busy earning a living. And I kind of felt the frustration there within him. Now, should he keep a log of all the stuff he does?
I don't know. I mean, it's probably not in that sense. I mean, because that is commissioned work, like you were talking about. You know, although your work, you know, is slightly different on the portraiture side that you're doing. I know you're doing, but it's that day-to-day thing. It's difficult. I mean, I do understand that I've been in a fortunate position in education as well in many ways. In that, that's where I earn my living. So it does allow me. I mean, I'm talking photography all the time. I'm involved in photography all the time, and it does allow me to do some of my own work as well. And I do understand that that's a fortunate position to be in. And I would never, you know, decry anybody else working in the profession in terms of that they have to earn that living. I do think that is a slightly different thing than your personal work. And who you are personally as a photographer. And I can't talk about getting that balance. I mean, I've only done that when I was working full-time as a photographer, say, in National Museum, but then that was still within the area that I was wanting to work in. So it was still involved in that sort of side of photography.
All the things fell into place, didn't they, for you? Looking back at your career.
No, they did. They did, and education came at the right time. You know, I'd made that choice to go into education, but I do understand the privilege of being in that position as well. And not having to, you know, directly earn a living from producing images on commission for something, you know, like a newspaper or something. So I do understand that.
Let's talk a little bit about Wales, because I think since this is about Wales, what's the way forward for photographers in Wales, do you reckon? Where are we?
Well, it's great to begin with what you were doing. And that's I think that's a huge mover and should be a huge mover, because it'd be lovely. I'm looking forward to listening to the podcasts of other people, and I know that you're going to be kind of moving it into up and coming photographers and young photographers in Wales, and I think they need a good voice within Wales, and I don't think that's there at the moment, for whatever reason. I don't see it being. I've always had a problem with Wales visually. I think I mentioned before. I think if you deal with the word in Wales, you've got a much stronger base.
You have indeed.
So I think that the visual in Wales, both photographically and visually, needs to up in some way. The way forward on that, I'm not sure. We talked about, you know, Wales needing a kind of photographic centre in some way that links the history of what we are here, and the photographers, very fine photographers who've worked in Wales and continue to work in Wales, as a place, as almost a repository of their work in some way, where whether that's online or not, I don't know.
Well, you have this crazy thing that Philip Jones Griffiths' work doesn't have a base here, and you know that I know there's an exhibition in Aberystwyth in the summer, and it'd be great to go and see that exhibition. But we have there are some really good photographers who come from Wales. You know, superb.
I think we need that does need somehow to be made more apparent, I think. You know. But I think as I say, it's great that a forum like this will come online as a resource.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that's our hope, you know, to make it happen like that. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? 10 years?
Doing more of my own work, I think, would be fair to say.
Okay.
Yeah, and however that comes about, that's a definite want. Education is all consuming, you know, if you take it on, I think, properly and seriously. There's a lot of preparation, there's a lot of other things that kind of get in the way sometimes of lecturing and teaching, but yes, you know, in a kind of fortunate position, as I've said, but I do see myself in the end of kind of pulling back further from that and then developing some of the work that I've got going now, but in a much stronger way, really. So a kind of exciting period. I think that hopefully the next 10 years, so about 10 years, is more about me. Sounds very selfish, and maybe that's coming back to the question about, is photography a selfish, indulgent kind of medium? Perhaps it is. and I need time to do that.
Right.
So I'm looking for time.
You, your daughter, Nia, is a photographer.
Yeah.
And I guess she picked that up from her dad.
She definitely did, yeah. She wants to eventually move into working with aid agencies, and she's been to Bolivia and is off to Nepal soon.
Oh, wow.
She's contacted lots of charities out there again. And yeah, you know, she loves it. She initially started doing natural history with me and then moved off on her own way to much more, I guess, social documentary work. Yeah, and enjoys it.
Fantastic. Why did you become an educator?
I became an educator because I love seeing people develop from sometimes a kind of standpoint that they didn't believe they could, you know, in a sense. It's that enjoyment of seeing somebody flourish in some way. I've never believed that we should hold back anything in terms of our own love of things and our skill of things. I think education is about just giving, and I'm a firm believer in that. So I'll never say, oh, this is my technique. I'm not going to tell anyone how you do this or how you do that. You can't do that. I've seen it happen in educators where it's like, oh, I'm not telling you that because I've worked 10 years to kind of work to that point. You know, if you're an educator, you can't do that. You have to kind of open up and just say, right, you know, look, you move with this now. I've been doing this, it's kind of worked. You move with this now and you see how this works. It's also great to work with young, fresh minds, you know, and we've got some very, very good students who I know will do well ultimately. And it's exciting working with them. They challenge you sometimes as well, you know.
From an educational point of view, I mean, lots of people, I guess, I don't know if I'm right in saying this, but sometimes I think that people go in to do photography because they think it's easy. Do you find that at all?
You do. You do, sadly, you do. And I think actually it's probably one of the hardest mediums, not one of the easiest. I think that there's an essence of, well, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, but I can always press a shutter. I can always make an image. And of course you can. Of course you can. And one thing I'm always saying to students is, there has to be more, because everyone can press that shutter. But in the same way that everyone can draw, if there's a need to, you can draw. You know, it might not be brilliant. I could draw you here. I can make a representation of you. Okay? So I can draw as everyone can draw.
Yeah, you draw birds though, don't you?
I do some drawing of that. But I mean, it doesn't matter who you are, you can still hold that pencil and make a representation of something you see in the same way that you can press a shutter and make an image. Okay? But the thing with photography is that it's deemed that it's an easier process to produce something that is good.
Right.
And I would argue that one. And I would say, coming back to points we've talked about before, is that without a clear understanding of what it is you're photographing and why you're photographing it and what it means to you, so that's the investment again of time, that you're never going to make as fine a representation of something as you can.
Yeah.
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 It's a difficult one, but students do come into it, and we do have problems with students who come in thinking that it is actually an easier medium. And I think because of the idea that it's an easier medium, they're very surprised when it's probably, photography, one of the hardest subjects to work and produce some really good stuff.
So everybody is not a photographer then?
Everyone is a photographer in the sense it's a very democratic art, in that we can make an image, and iPhones and all of this, and you know, we make images. It's what we make them of, and it's how we construct the image. And I think that's where the difference comes. So I think a photographer, and I think you can train people. I think there is an innate sense in some people of what a vision is and how they see. But I do think, otherwise it wouldn't be an education, but I do think you can hone that. And I do think you can take that on a route where a student begins to understand that, and I come back to it all the time, the investment within a process or an investment within a place becomes key to the success of their imagery.
Do you think you're a dinosaur?
No, I don't. I don't think I'm a dinosaur. I mean, I think that we need, if it is a dinosaur, we need dinosaurs today. Yeah. I think in the sense that it kind of grounds a sort of modern approach to photography in a historical context, and without, if you like, the dinosaurs. And maybe a dinosaur's a good thing in that sense. I've said no, and now I'm kind of saying yes to some degree. But if the dinosaur can't adapt to what's going on now, then I think it's a bad thing. So I'm digital primarily, taught in film, but very much a digital photographer now. Happy with that, not a problem with it. It's changed the way maybe I work to some degree, but I still have all the kind of ethos and philosophical values that have come from a photographer who was trained in film, trained in darkroom. Now, if that's a dinosaur, then we need more of them, because we need to have some of those ethics and some of those principles and philosophies of years ago. And this is why I'm kind of interested in looking at early photographers, bird photographers as well. We need to apply some of those principles to what we are now. And I think without that, then photography is on a kind of very flimsy footing. It's almost like it's going to be blown away with the next wind, because it doesn't have the roots.
Yes.
And I think we actually need the roots to kind of establish where we've come from. Yeah. So I'm happy. I don't think I'm a dinosaur, coming back to it, but I'm happy that some of the dinosaur principles remain, I think, with me to kind of apply to where we are now.
As an educator, teaching young people and even mature students who come on courses in where you work at the atrium, what are you looking for, and how do you approach the teaching of these people?
Well, I think in terms of what you're looking for, you're obviously looking for potential in somebody. Now, it's interesting to see, well, how does that manifest itself? You're not looking for the finished object, otherwise why would you be wanting to come on 3 years of education? So there is the potential there. And as much as anything, we're looking for somebody who's interested in life. And you don't have to come from photography to be that. So, if you're a genuinely inquisitive person, maybe come through A-levels or mature education, and you've studied English literature, or you've studied philosophy, or you've studied economics, then those are key areas to be kind of working with as well, because it's just showing that you are an individual who has something that is a curiosity within life. And that kind of curiosity can come through a passion of something else first, and then photography second. So you might have a love of something. It doesn't matter what it is. Right. Okay, the love could be natural history, as it was in my case. It could be on bikers in North Wales, or it could be on bakers in South Wales. It doesn't matter. Or you might have a love of, jewellery making or something. And if you bring your photography to that, then that's, as much as anything, where it begins. The photography, in many ways, for me, it's just a way of documenting and recording your passion. And your passion is the first thing, and that doesn't have to be photography. And I know it's curious because you think, but that it's a photography degree, it has to be that. No, it doesn't. Photography is a means of expression of something else.
Of something inside your head.
Of something inside your head.
Or inside your heart.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I'd expect to see somebody bringing a body of work in, and that body of work doesn't have to be brilliantly shot. You'd hope it would be reasonably exposed and things, but not brilliantly shot or anything in that way. But it would show me that they had an interest in a particular area of work. Now, if they have that, I'm interested in them. I would much rather that than a scattergun approach to somebody who comes in with 20 or 30 images, and they're all over the place, and there's some from the holiday, and then there's some of the dog, and then there's some of Auntie Mary at a wedding and something, and all of this sort of thing. Then doesn't tell me anything. It tells you it's scattergun. It tells you almost like you're seeing photography for what it isn't. Somebody comes with 20 images of, mining memorabilia from Wales or something, then I'm interested. I'm thinking, right, okay, you've got something here. You're thinking, you're bringing your own subject and you're bringing photography to it. And in many ways, Sebastião Salgado is the greatest example of that. He didn't train as a photographer or anything. No. Came through it through economics and understanding that, the kind of there was repression in the world, and so kind of wanted to then express that through photographs. So it's not that you need to be a photographer. You need to be an interesting person to have something to say.
And so when they come to or go to a university, it's amalgamating that something to say with a craft then, I guess, yes?
Well, hopefully it is with a craft, yeah. And I'm a kind of firm believer that if you really want to learn photography, you can learn it pretty damn quickly in terms of the techniques
and the
mechanics, because it's not that difficult in the end. Where you need to kind of hone that skill is in going out and working with it and understanding what your images are saying, how they're constructed in terms of what they're saying about any kind of given situation. And the photographers, lots of photographers who are self-trained who are really very good and haven't come through a 3-year luxury of education, if you like. And I know there are people out there who would say that's the better way to go. I would say, as an educator, it's another way to go. And I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I would say you might get different things. But in terms of who you are as a photographer, then I think it's absolutely key to have that time, and coming back to it again, is that time, and that's what education, 3 years of education will do, to develop that passion
and allow you to make
and that craft,
and allow you to make the mistakes,
and allow you to make mistakes. And probably in the kind of commercial world, you don't get that to the same degree. You do not get that. So, I don't think there's a better way to go. 3 years self-taught, I don't see it like that. And I think that there's a nice bringing together of those two things anyway, that people who are working in photography have come through all sorts of different ways to it. And I think that's as it should be. But I think 3 years for a student in photography ought to be used, really, really productively. Like you say, the ability to make mistakes, the time to explore, experiment, do things that, suddenly when they've lost that 3 years, they can't do because the pressures of earning a living become more apparent. I know that they're, getting into debt and there is all of that money situation already, but it still does give you that opportunity to do those things. And I just hope that students realise that, and we try and get them to understand that and say, actually, this is a privileged part of your education here, because we're giving you the chance to work in the way you want to work. We'll structure them initially, but we let them go, and we let them go into areas that they want to go into. And sometimes that's really hard for them, because they'll start with a blank canvas, and that's sometimes the hardest thing. Right, who are you? What do you want to do? There's not a brief now. We're not telling you to go out and photograph that or do that or respond to that. It's a blank canvas. It's what we all have when we start our own personal work. We have a blank canvas. Where'd you go? What do you do? Where's your starting point? And often your starting point is, who are you?
Yes.
Yeah?
Which is very difficult sometimes.
Which is very difficult sometimes, yeah.
Well, difficult even at my age.
Well, I think it is difficult, yeah. It is difficult.
With students wanting to go out and work in the field, I mean, you give them your best, your absolute best as an educator. And they're very fortunate to have someone like you there to help them and guide them on their photographic journey, or their early photographic journey. Do you think there's a responsibility on the students as well to source other people who are equally or who could give them a different take on the actual business of being a photographer out in the field, freelance photographers or photographers who work in studios. Do you think that they should take initiatives themselves like that rather than depending on a university to do it for them?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it has to come from that, because that just shows that they have got that drive, that initiative. You know, I think if something comes through from a university asking for placements, then straight away it's kind of like, well, why? You know, it should be coming from that individual, because that individual is targeted at a particular place, has offered their services, if you like, to get involved in that. It should come through that. It should come through that. And then you'd hope that the industry itself would respond to that positively, you know, in kind of helping people. I mean, I think we can certainly kind of push them in certain directions, and or say, look, there's a few really strong students coming through. You know, it might be worth having a look at these people. But I think that it's a kind of combination, I think, of a number of things there. The student has to do it. The industry has to be prepared to get involved and accept that. And the institution has to play its role as well through what we are as kind of educators on a broader sense.